Alfred of Wessex became king at a time when all of Britain was in danger of being devoured by the rampaging Vikings. Yet, through a combination of personal strength and military genius, he managed to halt the Viking advance into England. He also initiated the process by which his successors began to extend control over other Anglo-Saxon kings until England was eventually unified. For these reasons, history remembers him as Alfred the Great. The exact date of birth of the child who would become King Alfred the Great is unknown, but is believed to be between 847 and 849 CE. He was born in Wantage, in present-day Oxfordshire, the youngest of 5 sons to King Aethelwulf of Wessex, king of the West Saxons, and his wife Osburga. 4 of those boys would go on to become king. When he was 5 years of age, Alfred travelled with his father to Rome, where Aethelwulf was confirmed by the Pope. They returned to Oxfordshire in 856, but shortly thereafter, Aethelwulf was deposed by his second eldest son, Aethelbald. The oldest boy, Aethelstan, apparently died in battle in the 850s, after having defeated the Vikings in the first recorded sea battle in English history. Aethelwulf ruled as King of Wessex for just 4 years, dying in 860 at the age of 35. He was replaced by the next oldest son, Aethelbald. His rule was marked by a series of Viking invasions, which resulted in permanent settlements being established by these aggressive foreigners. Mobile Viking armies arrived from what is now Denmark in shallow draft longships, carrying out plundering and looting raids across Northumberland and as far as Winchester. By 867, they had taken over York and set up a permanent settlement in Northumbria. Upon Ethelbert's death in 865, the next in line, Ethelred, took the throne. He now faced the challenge of a renewed Danish invasion. In January 871, Ethelred's army was badly defeated by the Danes at the Battle of Reading, only to get vengeance at the Battle of Englefield. Over the next 3 months, he managed to rebuild his army, but was again defeated in April at the Battle of Merton. Ethelred was killed during the battle. The next in line to become king was Alfred, who would have been around 24 at the time. Alfred had grown to be a powerful, strong-minded, but highly strung young man. Since the age of 18, he had been riding into battle alongside his brother. Prior to becoming king, he fought in 9 battles against the Vikings. In January 871, he was second in command to Ethelred at the Battle of Englefield. The Saxon forces split in 2, with Alfred waiting with one force at a valley fort known as Alfred's Castle, located at Ashbury. Not far away, Ethelred had his men deployed to move against the Danish army, which was camped at Uffington Castle. The 2 opposing armies then approached each other, with Alfred and Ethelred's forces merging together. From a distance of several hundred yards, the men of both sides began jeering at each other. At a decisive point, Ethelred left the field and went to a nearby church to pray for guidance. He had instructed Alfred to do nothing until he returned. Meanwhile, the Danes were deploying their forces in an advantageous position to attack. With their king not returning, the Saxon soldiers became increasingly impatient. Taking control of the situation, Alfred gave the order to attack. Driving his men forward in an unconventional uphill assault, he led the Saxon army to a stunning victory. The Danes were pushed back to the east across Berkshire, leaving thousands of bodies behind. When Ethelred died at the Battle of Merton 3 months later, there was no doubt that Alfred would take over as King of Wessex. The kingdom was in desperate need of a strong leader who had proven himself militarily. The Vikings were on the rampage, having been bolstered by their recent victories. Even as Alfred was burying his brother, they struck again, defeating the Saxon army at an unknown location. When Alfred returned to lead his forces in May, they were again beaten, this time at Wilton. Following their victory at Wilton, the Danes focused on raiding other parts of England, allowing for relative peace in Saxony that lasted for the next 5 years. Then, in 876, they returned, this time with a new leader named Guthrum. The invaders managed to slip past the Saxon army on the Welsh border and launch an attack on Wareham in Dorset. They then marched to the west and captured Exeter in Devon. Alfred responded by setting up a blockade. This eventually forced the Danes to surrender and fall back to Mercia. But then, in January 878, they launched a surprise attack on Chippenham in northwest Wiltshire. Alfred happened to be spending his Christmas there and only just managed to escape capture. Legend tells us that the king was given shelter by a peasant woman who had no idea who she was helping. The story goes that she left Alfred to oversee some cakes that she was cooking on a fire, but that he became preoccupied and allowed them to get burnt. When the woman returned, she expressed her anger, but when the identity of her guest became known to her, apologized profusely. Alfred, however, insisted that it was he who should apologize. Alfred now set up a fortified base at Athelney in the Somerset marshes. From there, he waged a campaign against the Danes. He inflicted a heavy defeat against Guthrum at Eddington in May 878. Alfred instructed his infantry to use their shields to form a protective wall as they advanced towards the enemy. This was in imitation of the fighting tactics of the ancient Romans. It proved a successful strategy, with the Danes being routed. There followed a 14-day siege at Chippenham, following which Guthrum surrendered. The two kings then signed the Treaty of Wedmore, by which England was formally divided between the Saxons and the Danes. The Danes retained control of lands north of a line drawn roughly between London and Chester. The peace lasted for several years, but then, in 884 or 885, the Danes raided a hamlet near Kent. Alfred responded with a naval assault upon the Vikings. This attack is recognised as the first successful engagement of an enemy by the Royal Navy, which had been created by Alfred a few years earlier. Peace was re-established for a number of years. Then, in 892, the Danes launched another, much bigger raid. It consisted of 330 ships. This fleet dug in at Appledore and Milton in Kent. The invaders appeared to be intent on colonising the entire south of England, bringing with them their wives and children. Alfred attempted to negotiate with the Viking leaders who had landed at Milton. While these talks were taking place, however, the Danish invaders who were camped at Appledore began marching northwards. Alfred's son, Edward, marched after them with a Saxon army. The invaders were defeated at Farnham in modern-day Surrey. They fled to an island on the River Colne and Hertfordshire, eventually surrendering. No sooner had this Viking force been dealt with that Alfred was forced to deal with raids by the East Anglia and Northumbrian Danes. These ones sailed their boats up the Thames and Lee rivers, digging in just 20 miles north of London. Alfred responded by obstructing the river and boxing the Vikings in. He then proceeded to outmaneuver the invaders, forcing them to abandon their efforts and return to their homelands in defeat. Alfred knew that the key to defending against further Viking attacks was to build a strong navy, and this is what he next focused on. He even personally designed a ship that was much faster than its predecessors. The king also proved himself to be a superior military tactician when it came to ground forces. Innovative troop deployments lay the foundation for much of his battlefield successes. He split his army in two, with half always at home, while the other half was out on campaign. The half left at home was employed to provide food for the army out in the field. They were also able to defend against enemy attack. Alfred also introduced the practice of building fortified boroughs throughout Wessex. These were placed 20 miles apart, allowing people to have a nearby stronghold to flee to in times of trouble. Among the greatest legacies left by King Alfred was the Book of Dooms, also called the Deemings. This was the first definitive body of Anglo-Saxon law. Alfred was also concerned with education. He arranged the translation of books dealing with such subjects as history and philosophy from Latin into Anglo-Saxon so that they could be read by the common people. By 890, Alfred, having thoroughly defeated the Vikings, was acknowledged as the King of England. He died on October the 26th, 901, at the age of 50. His cause of death is unknown, but may have been the consequence of a painful illness which he was known to have suffered throughout his adult life. He was buried in the Old Minster in Winchester, the traditional burial place for members of the West Saxon royal family. His body was later removed to New Minster, which is thought to have been specially built to house his remains. Even by that time, his accomplishments were of such significance that he was being remembered as King Alfred the Great. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe. If you have any other suggestions for future topics you'd like us to cover, please leave a comment below, and we'll see you next time on History Junkie.